Our first speaker this morning, you've probably heard over the years, Machine Repeat. Machine Repeat is the most trusted marketplace for buyers and sellers of used farm equipment. Machine Repeat was founded in 1989 by Greg Peterson. Machine Repeat has come a long way since the humble beginnings in Greg's home office in Rochester, Minnesota. It was there that Greg passionately researched, tracked, and reported on the action and the auction going on all around the country. In 2014, Farm Journal and Machine Repeat partnered to provide a more effective marketplace for buying and selling used ag equipment. He also did the same during the 6 seasons that he appeared on RFD TV's Machinery Show. Now, Greg has his own show, appropriately called Machine Repeat. Each episode features Greg traveling to a different farm machinery auction somewhere around the country. He provides his analysis of current and historical trends in the used equipment market and answers viewer questions about what their equipment is worth in the Ask Machine Repeat segment. Please welcome Greg Peterson, AKA Machine Repeat.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here at Bean Day. And Mitch was telling me, is this the 50th conference? 50 years, man, that is very cool. Hats off to what you guys do, and thank you for feeding the world, doing what you folks do here. An honor to be here, and I got in late last night. A nice little Fargo breeze this morning, so it makes me feel at home there. I grew up in Benson, Minnesota, a little bit south of here, but I have some nephews and nieces that have gone to school up here, Concordia, and I always enjoy coming back to the Fargo-Moorhead area and watching it grow over the years. Just unbelievable. So what we'll do today, we'll talk about some trends in the used market, what we're seeing obviously, early 2025 here. Things are in flux. A lot of change, a lot of opportunity, I think, going forward. Obviously, at times, a bit challenging, but I think these inflection points create opportunities, on the machinery front to advance your operation. So we'll talk about some of the things there, but before I get started, I just need to say thank you. Last November, I hit 35 years ago that I started this journey compiling auction prices, and I had no idea where it was going to go. I was 23 years old, but actually here's how I got my start. Way back before the internet, when I talk to young farm groups, I have to remind them that the internet always has not been here. When you're old like me, it's getting harder to remember life before the internet, but part of me, despite the fact that we built out a technology company with social media and everything, part of me almost is hoping or wondering if we don't need maybe like a week off, 1 week a year, where we could all just kind of unplug and try to remember what life was like before that, before cell phones. But nonetheless, it's been quite a journey, and again, thank you for all your support along the way. I like to show this image because I get asked a lot, Greg, how did you get started? Building a business, a life out of compiling auction prices. And this is a pretty good analogy. Of course, down in Darwin, Minnesota on Highway 12, the world's largest ball of twine, at least in Minnesota, we claim it's the largest. I know Kansas says otherwise, but there was a column written in the Minnesota Tribune recently by a writer out of Fergus Falls. I think her name is Karen Tolkinen. She's a fabulous writer, and she wrote a column a couple months ago about the ball of twine, and there's a picture you can see of the farmer, and I can't remember his name. I apologize for that, but he obviously started, years and years ago, just with some baling twine and making this ball. And then Karen's point in her column was, all of us in life, a lot of times we start things. And her point was, what if you never stopped? And I was reading this column and going, that's me. I just started compiling auction prices 35 years ago, and I haven't stopped. And if you keep going with whatever your niche is, whatever your thing is, what's possible? And so again, I had no idea 35 years ago we'd wind up in television and radio and social media and do all this, and we do speaking gigs like this. It's been so much fun. Now I do have to say, as Minnesotans, we're a little depressed this week with our performance last Monday night with our Vikings. Although coming up here, you guys, NDSU just won another national title, correct? And how many is that? Like about 45 you guys have won? Something like that? So the Bison showing us how to do it. But, this week, and I've been a Vikings fan since I was a little guy. I grew up in Benson, Minnesota. First Viking game I ever went to was August of 1972, preseason game. My dad took me to the game. We're playing the San Diego Chargers. They kicked off. Remember Clint Jones, who was running back for the Vikings, number 26, catches the ball, goes 100 yards for a touchdown. That's the first thing I ever saw as a 6-year-old kid of a Viking game. And I'm thinking, this is great. Now, that did not prepare me for the lifetime of frustration and aggravation. But this week, as I was working through that, and it was a fun season, we enjoyed it. Farm Journal called me up and they were like, hey, Greg, you got to write another column for us. And the editor down in Missouri said, we got all this snow across, Kansas, Missouri, Ohio, southern Ohio, out east. And they said, maybe you should write a column on snow removal. And of course, at least I live in Rochester. We've been a little light. We hardly have any snow, which won't seem fair now in the next couple of days when it's 35 below wind chill and we have no snow. It's like, come on, what's missing here? But anyway, I started to write this column on snow removal. So just some Machine Repeat snow removal tips. Now, this was one of my favorites on the front of a Case IH 1660 years ago, a little triple auger rig there. Now, officially, Machine Repeat does not advise putting a snowblower on the front of your X9 1100 or your 9250 or your Gleaner R72. But hey, if you got to move snow, move it, do it right. And that's what we're used to up here in the Great White North. Now, my favorite that I've ever run across for moving snow is this one. It was a farmer in Illinois, took an old 643 corn head and converted it. And when you make these custom things on the farm, it's not enough just to make it, you got to name it. So the guy that thought of it, his name was Curtis, so he and his brother called this the Curtis. And it doesn't snow that much down in central southern Illinois these days, but when it does, they've got the 643 ready to roll there. Now, for you Alice Chalmers fans, this one's for you, a 1947 Alice M7. This was actually developed for the military at the tail end of World War II. And this rig was actually designed to rescue downed pilots, like in northern Italy, up in, I guess, the Alps, when they were fighting, Italy and Germany over there years ago. And there was a trailer that goes on the back of this thing. And occasionally you'll see one of these M7s around. Now, years ago, I posted a picture of this, and people started commenting, and it reminded them of something. And if you're my age, I'm 59, you might remember a cartoon when you were a kid. Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And I don't know if they modeled that rig after the Alice M7, but a little trivia question. That character there was like the MC of the show. Do you know whose voice that was? It was Fred Astaire, I believe, was the voice on that. So, again, if I told that to young farm groups, they'd look at me like, who is Fred Astaire? But I remember who Fred Astaire was, and used to watch that show growing up. Now, we have a lot of friends in Ohio, and New Idea Manufacturing back in the day actually made a front-mounted snowblower on the front of one of their Uni 709s for the city of Coldwater, Ohio, where they were headquartered. And I had someone send me this picture years ago, so a pretty unique way to move snow there. But my favorite snow-related picture was probably this one. It was years ago. I was at an auction in Wilmington, Ohio. It was a cold, rainy, kind of early spring day, really raw. And right when I got out of the truck, a couple came up from New York, and they said, Pete, we heard you were going to be here. And they were there to bid on a John Deere 7520. And we got, as you often do at an auction, we got visiting, and turns out they're quite the collectors. This is a picture of their John Deere collection. And that's a John Deere 7020 on the end, four-wheel drive. Now, if you look on top of it, that's a 72 model John Deere 500 snowmobile. And the guy's name was Tony. I was like, Tony, why did you put the snowmobile on top of your 70-20? And he said, well, because I can. And I thought, yep, that's the right answer. So we've had a lot of fun over the years talking about snowmobiles, and when we do see them at auction, it's kind of fun. But if we pivot from the snow and the cold to trends with used values, obviously 2024 was quite a year of change. This is kind of a big picture look here. If you've ever maybe seen me talk about this on our show or on Ag Day or on AgriTalk Radio, I do this quarterly report, mostly for the Wall Street folks. We call it our Machine Repeat Used Values Index. And it's basically my attempt to give a temperature reading on the used farm equipment market and values and trends up or down. So if you look on the far left, it's pretty simple. It's a 1 to 10 rating scale. And I started doing this years and years ago. And when I started it, I said 6.0 is what I consider kind of normal or stable used values over my 35 years. Now, if we look through here, I mean, we've been on quite a journey. I think it's interesting to look back, a lot we can learn. Like if you look at 2004, when used values shot up, kind of hard to remember now, but in 2004, that's kind of when China became modern China. So they were building airports, cities, just building everything. And of course, their demand for steel was insatiable, so the price of steel shot up. And of course, that affected the price of new equipment, your grain carts, your grain trailers, things like that. So when the price of new goes up, you know, it's connected at the hip to used values. So we saw used values go up. And really, that brings up a point. At 35 years tracking this data, I've always loved kind of the brutal honesty of the auction price point. Because you can put anything up for sale at an auction. And you'll see it on social media a lot now. I posted something yesterday about the average auction price on John Deere 4455s. All-time high last year, like $53,000. And people hop on and they go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Who would pay that much? And, you know, it can be a valid viewpoint. But what I've always liked is the one thing you can't argue about is what it's sold for. You know, that hammer drops and bang, it's sold for what it's sold for. And that's what I've tried to build out. So again, looking back through the years, obviously late 07, ethanol took off, and that was like a light switch. You know, auction prices shot through the roof. Basically stayed at an elevated level through early 13, which takes us to the point that I'm really focused on right now. If history can be a guide for us, you know, I'm looking back right now at the period from mid-13 through the end of 15. If you look at that chart, that was a pretty big drop. We went from about 9.5 all-time high on my 1 to 10 scale used values down to about 6.4, 6.5. And that happened in about 2.5 years. And again, we live in a world where all we think about and can see is what's right in front of our face. What happened today? What happened yesterday? And we miss the bigger picture. So I've been writing a lot about this period a decade ago, because that was the biggest drop in used values I've ever seen in 35 years. Nothing close to it. And the reason used values fell a decade ago like that was because when commodity prices fell, spring of 13, dealers were caught with way too much late model, particularly large equipment like 24-row planters, combines, high horse tractors, and they were stuck with it. And it takes a while to work out from under that. Now, I remember traveling the country back then and listening to dealers talk about the problem they were in a decade ago, and they, to a man, to a woman, said, this will never happen again. We're not gonna let this happen. And we can't let this happen again. We can't get this buildup of too much late model used. Well, you know, talk is one thing, but markets do what they do. And if we move along, obviously the last few years, late 20, 21, 22, early 23, that's the hottest used market I've ever seen. And there was no inventory on dealer lots, the worldwide supply chain mess, never seen anything like it. I interviewed dealers like my dad, who's 87, and they were like, we've never seen this level of low used inventory. So obviously auction prices were sky high. But again, if you look back at that drop, 13 to 15, I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So one of the big differences right now And I sort of think 2024 was year one of the recalibration in used values, except for combines. Combines were a year ahead. We're 2 years into that adjustment. But if you look at some of this data, pretty eye-opening stuff. So in 2024, the amount of 0 to 3-year-old equipment units that were sold at auction was unlike anything I've ever seen before. And if you compare it to the previous year, 23, and also to year one of the last big downturn in 14, I find it fascinating. So you can see all types of equipment, 233.6% more 0 to 3-year-old items sold at auction last year versus 14. And you can see by category, high horse tractors up 126%, combines up 120%. So why is that? Why did last year we see so many 0 to 3-year-old units sold at auction? Well, it's because of what's changed in the dealer world versus 10 years ago. This, consolidation, it's happening all across, not just ag, but everything, right? So 10 years ago, if you had a 4 or 5, like my dad had a 4-store dealership, that was pretty big. But now a 4-store dealership, there are hardly any left, right? They've all got just conglomerated, and which is, it is what it is. There's positives and negatives. But these dealers now that are so big, remember what I said they all said a decade ago, we're not going to let this happen again. Now, a decade ago, if you had 2 stores or 4 stores and the market and the merry-go-round stopped, commodity prices fell, and you had 35 excess combines on your lots, your 4 stores, you couldn't take them to auction and just move them because you'd have been out of business. You couldn't do that. You had to do the old hold and hope for better times strategy. Now, decades ago, there was a famous meeting that Deere Corporate had where they gathered all the Deere dealers from around North America. And, I've heard a lot of stories about this from people that were there. They said, boys, look around. And they said, I forget what the verbiage was, but most of you won't be here. And you can imagine how independent, dealers like my dad took that. They're like, wow, I've built my life around selling your equipment. Now you're telling me that I might not be here? And it was, that was what Deere was moving towards, was kind of the Caterpillar model, fewer, larger dealers. And the reason they did that, in theory, it was kind of in theory at the time, but I thought it was to better move through down periods. And so you could look at 2024 as kind of, proof when these larger dealers, they're capitalized differently than a 2-store or a 4-store. So it's a tough, and it's tough for farmers right now. Livestock's a little better, dairy's a little better. But dealers right now, they had some great years, obviously, and now it's the opposite. So their choice is they can hold it and pay 8% interest, but if you got 25, 30, 40 stores, that's a lot of interest on a lot of higher priced stuff than 10 years ago. So they want to move it out, and they're taking big losses. The thing that is different now that I've never seen before is the level of cooperation from the manufacturer level. And I've sort of wondered over the years, maybe did manufacturers, particularly Deere, let these dealers get too big? Because now the leverage these dealers have back towards the manufacturer is significant. And so now when they're dealing with this current excess level of late model used inventory, not to oversimplify, but basically they've said, you know what? 2024, 2025 is not so much about selling new. It's like, we are moving this used stuff. And they've told the manufacturer, who obviously wants them to sell a ton of new stuff, they're like, we're moving this used stuff because we're paying 8% interest on this stuff. And what I have never seen before is now manufacturers like Deere came out and they're starting to co-op used advertising for their dealers. Never been done before. They're subsidizing dealers, to help them move stuff, which is smart. So they're being nimble and changing the way they've always done things. Now, the one thing I would write up, and I've been writing about to you guys as farmers, you have this built-up generational knowledge. You, your father, your grandma, your uncles, and when things get tight, you tighten the belt, and you sit, equipment-wise, you kind of sit tight. And that's, you have to do that. It's wise strategy. The tricky part is in that collective knowledge when you go, okay, when this happened in the past, for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I was kind of in the driver's seat. If I had to update my combine, my use plan or whatever, dealers had too much, I could get a good deal. Okay, that thinking's dangerous right now because the rate of turn, like I said on this 0 to 3-year-old stuff, look at that versus 10 years ago. 233% more sold last year at auction. That was year 1. 2025 will be year 2 of the adjustment. And again, think back to what I said about how long the downturn was from 13, the biggest drop I've ever seen. That took 2.5 years until it flattened out, end of 15. And it wasn't magically like used value shot back up then, of course, but what they did do is they quit tanking and they found footing. So I wrote a column for Farm Journal December of 2015, and it was really uncomfortable for me because I'm a Norwegian boy from Benson. I don't like telling you guys what to do. But when the data screams at me, then I will say, this is what it's telling me. So at the end of 2015, I wrote, you'll never have a better opportunity to be a buyer of good used equipment than the next year or two. And think about it. If you would have bought, like let's say, whatever, if you're a red guy, say a Magnum 290s, whatever, what they were selling for. You can look in our website, machinerypete.com. All the auction prices are free. You can go back 25 years, and you look what they sold for end of 15, 16, 17. And then you looked at what they sold for 21, 22, 23. This stuff's getting older and older, but worth more money. We can argue about inflation. When people say used values are going up, it's all inflation, that's incorrect. It's a piece of it, costs of new obviously, but it's the supply. The supply is that you have to consider that. So again, I think what we're moving towards are these cycles where almost by design, the manufacturers, like they shut off the spigot in 24 here. They're shutting production down. They're closing plants. What they're trying to protect is that price of new, which is just skyrocketed. They don't want to back up. So now times are tight. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to help our dealers move this used stuff. And then if you, again, play this out, 25, 26, whenever the price of corn and beans goes up, if it's 18 months, whatever, 2 years, 2.5, 3, what's going to happen? You're going to have people who tighten the belt for 3, 4 years, and then at this, so then you're going to need to update your planter, your combine, your tractor. At the same time, everybody else is going to need to update, and manufacturers then are going to turn the switch on and crank up production, but they're going to say, we only have X number to sell, just like they did in 22 and 3, kind of had a quota, and that's going to protect that new price point. So I think that's kind of what we're setting up is this boom and bust cycle. And of course, the price of new, I was down at Commodity Classic last year, and Deere's new big tractor there, we did a nice video on it, and hey, cool, it has all these features, but what was the number one thing people asked me? Machinery Pete, what's it cost? It's $1.2 million. Okay, so bigger, and it's interesting, compiling this auction data, we track everything, so big stuff, small stuff, and no surprise to you folks, but the smaller stuff, good use, smaller capacity stuff, like smaller class combines, smaller planters, those are holding their value better because the manufacturers are focusing on big, but not everyone needs this tractor, right? So I sort of sitting on the side watching, on a manufacturer level, who's going to start catering to the mid-size, or maybe who's going to make some equipment that's maybe a little simpler, maybe not so expensive. Now it's tough. It's easy to say, oh, someone should do that. It's hard to break kind of a monopoly and get in there and compete, but the opportunity is there for other companies, and it's just they got to have enough dry powder to go for it when the time is now, when they should go for it. But I'll just share a couple things that I picked up. I covered 8 auctions in person, late November and December. I wanted to get out, not just compile the data, but, talk to people. And go to events like this. And by the way, one thing I noticed in 2024, it was kind of coming screaming through, was that people were missing in-person auctions. And we appreciate the convenience of online. Hey, we just click the button, we keep doing what we're doing. But what they were missing, it was a piece of them that was hurting inside. And they were missing this, what you guys are doing today, getting together, talking, having a donut. And that's what auctions, I've been covering them for 35 years. I like going and writing the prices down, but the real fun is meeting someone. Hey, Bob, where are you from? You're from Maynard, Minnesota. What's new in Maynard? How are the beets looking? What are you thinking? And that's the kind of stuff I've always liked to try and pull in to what I write about or talk about, not just the numbers, but what you guys are feeling and thinking. So first auction we covered right before Thanksgiving, it was in southwest Minnesota, over by Marshall. Good used loader tractors. Obviously, livestock, dairy sector has been stronger the past couple of years. So this, strong price like a 20-plus-year-old JX75, record price $30K and almost 2,600 hours. Next day, we went to an auction in Minneota, Minnesota, which if you don't know Minneota, they've won they're kind of like the North Dakota state of Minnesota high school football. They won 7, 8 state titles. And when I was in Minneota at this auction, I had an older gentleman come up, and he had a grandson on the team that just won the state title for Minneota, their 10th state title. And I asked him, I said, Harold, what is it? How does Minneota do that? And this is interesting. He said it was just one guy. He said this particular coach, I think he came from Lyle, Minnesota, decades ago, and just came in and did it his way. And then the community, you guys know farm communities, it just took hold. And that made me think of years ago, I was in Des Moines, I think People's Land, they invited me to speak at their big land conference. It was the year after Trump came and talked, before he won the first time. So 2016 I was there. And the keynote speaker at that event was the guy that wrote the book, The Big Short. If you remember that movie with Steve Carell, about the meltdown, the financial meltdown in 07, 08 on Wall Street. And so he got up to talk, and he was it was a room full of 1,000 farmers from all over North America. And he said, guys, I don't know anything about farming. I mean, nothing. He said, thank you for the food you put on our tables, but literally, I know jack. And he started to talk about why, the banking meltdown happened. And a farmer stood up at the end and asked him a question. He said, sir, just tell me, what's the simple answer to why that meltdown happened? And the guy, I can't remember the author's name, but he said, you're not going to like my answer. And he said it was because 2 CEOs were in the wrong chairs at the wrong time. He said they were ding-dongs. They're stupid. They made bad decisions for their banks. And they took the whole herd of buffalo off the cliff. And the farmer, wise guy, like you folks, and he didn't believe it. He asked him again, no, really, what was and he said, I'm telling you, with organizations, it comes down to the people in the leadership roles. And he said that's how that happened. So anyway, sometimes as I get older, I digress a little bit. But this auction, I started on Minneota. Okay, so there you go. But this auction in Minneota, the skid steer was what I came away talking about. This 12-year-old or 11-year-old SV250 41K was the 3rd highest auction price ever. And it was interesting, the only SV250 that's ever sold higher was this one on 2 different auctions. And if you remember, you probably saw this at the Farm Progress Show or Louisville back in the day, 2012. Case came out with a limited, one-of-one Red Power Edition. And they had a benefit auction for the FFA kids back in 12 at the Farm Progress Show, brought 77K. Years later, I saw it on an auction in Georgia for 68K. And then again, the one in Minneota, that was the 3rd highest at 41K. A couple days later, I was in Dexter, Minnesota, just outside of Austin, a very nice farm retirement sale. Everything sold well. It was kind of that 10-plus-year-old stuff, the sweet spot. But really, the one item that caught my eye was the grain cart, this 22 model, 2-year-old Brent 2596, $170,000. It's the highest auction price I've ever seen on a grain cart. And it kind of got me thinking, you know, again, I've been doing this 35 years, so I went into our website, and again, it's all free. You can look at this stuff. But interesting, the highest auction price 20 years ago on a grain cart, $36,000 bucks 20 years ago. 10 years ago, it was $72K. And again, last year, we're up to $170. So all these years I've been tracking these used prices, these used values, these trends. Again, the one truth is what's happening in the used market is connected to that rising price of new. And I always used to say the price of new, I would kind of figure 4%, it would go up a year, whatever, give or take. Well, of course, that got obliterated coming out of the pandemic with, you know, supply chain mess. Couldn't find employees. And the price of new just skyrocketed. So now you've got a 2-year-old 170K grain cart. But it's interesting. Right now, I'm starting to write that end of 24, early 25, I'm seeing a split in the auction pricing. So that sale in Dexter, Minnesota had what everybody wants. Mostly 10-year-old stuff, everything sold high. The next day, I go down to Southeast Iowa. It's a consignment sale, a wholesale auction. And I stood there and I watched this 21 model X1000. Now, it had higher hours, almost 1,200 engine hours, but it brought $345. That's a big check, but that's $40,500 lower than any X9 1000 that I've seen. But it showed up kind of on a consignment sale, and it just, you know, higher hours, and it wasn't what you guys want, and that's what happens. Again, that's the brutal honesty of the auction. It brings what it brings. Hopped over from there to Mount Pulaski, Illinois for an auction, and this was an interesting sale because it was a retirement sale, and I remember the guy who was selling, I got visiting with him, and I said, how far back in history does your family farm go? And he said 1845. So if you get east, their history is a lot longer than ours in Minnesota and the Dakotas. And I think he told me that President Polk was signed on the deed, which I thought was pretty cool. But anyway, I was walking along at this auction, and right before I took this picture, a local farmer came up and he said, Pete, have you ever seen anything like this? And I sort of looked at him like, what are you asking me? And he said, these are the worst prices I've ever seen. And, you know, it's interesting, 35 years doing this. Again, opinions are free. We all have them. And that was his take on the sale. Actually, up to that point, I thought everything is sold exactly right where it should. And then right after that, I stood there and I filmed this Bush Hog 1865E side boom mower selling for $20,000. And the owner told me he paid like $16,000 for it like 4 years ago. And right next to that was a Yetter 3541 rotary hoe that brought $17,000. Same deal. The guy told me I paid like, you know, $12,500 for it like 3-4 years ago. So, you know, the auction prices, they just are what they are. And sentiment is different. I've always thought these ag sentiment surveys, they're very valuable. But I mean, no surprise if we call around and ask you guys how you're feeling right now. You know, not super rosy, and that makes sense. But again, the auction strips that out, and it's just checkbook reality. What did it bring? And on that same Illinois sale, it was kind of a rare one, this white 185 two-wheel drive, but it had over 7,000 hours, 36K, that's a record high on a two-wheel 185. Stayed in Illinois, went down to the southern part of the state. This was a fun one. You maybe saw it. We just had the TV episodes on our show on this sale. It was in Bible Grove, Illinois. Guy retiring. Donnie Duker was his name. Nice guy. So he had this 2014 Challenger MT865C, 1,450 hours. So now it's 10 years old. And that's one of my machine repeat rules that for 35 years, what the data has taught me is that once a good piece of used is 10 years old, everybody wants it. And just one, if you remember anything from what I'm yakking about today, just remember that low hour 10-year-old everybody wants. The value spot is the 3 to 7-year-old ones. Get the good used low hour ones there, like a 5-year-old one. Like right now when values are falling. And you buy a nice 5-year-old one, guess what? In 5 years, you're gonna have a low hour 10-year-old one. And compared to the price of new, that's why this tractor brought $341,000. And the farmer, Donnie, told me he paid $250 for it 4 years ago in California. Now, it wasn't black when he bought it. He had that custom painted by an auto guy, and I mean, it was just beautiful. And right up by the cab, you can't see it, but it said Hellcat. And I thought, I'm standing in Bible Grove, Illinois, and I'm watching a Hellcat sell for a record price. You can see it was $26,000 over. But it was fascinating because the whole sale was pretty strong, but there weren't many people there. It was cold and windy that day, but it was an in-person auction. You're standing there going, this is kind of unbelievable. This thing sold for $341,000, and you can see the picture. It wasn't like the old days when we'd all just be jammed around it. So, people bidding online. But earlier in that line of equipment, to show you what's happened with the bigger late model stuff, this Hagee sprayer, this 22 model, was like new, only had 182 hours on it, sold for $428K. Now I can tell you that's the second highest auction price ever on a STS 12, but you can see my note there back in March, early 24, before the big drop started, we saw one with 549 hours go for $480,500. So that's how the big late model stuff, the sprayers, the combines, the planters, that's the drop. 2024 was year one, except again for combines, that's year two, where the 10-year-old stuff is holding well. So the splitting I'm talking about with auction pricing, it was, I just showed you that sprayer, so that was December 12th. 2 days later, we're in Crofton, Kentucky, in the far western part of Kentucky. And this guy was a tobacco farmer. His name was Dale C. And the auctioneer, a young auctioneer actually, Gary Taylor, called me up and he said, Pete, you gotta be at this sale. He goes, this farmer, I mean, he took such good care of his stuff. So we went down, and I like to get there the day before and do a walkthrough video with my cell phone. And what I found really powerful over the years is hearing the farmer, you, stand by your equipment and just talk about it. And it's interesting because a guy like Dale and you folks, you're not soapbox people. Like you aren't, like I say, I'm a Minnesotan. It's not who we are. We don't like saying my stuff is really good. But it's really, really powerful. And so we did a walkthrough video. I just filmed Dale. Super nice guy. And of course, I grew up in Minnesota. I don't know anything about tobacco farming. And they had this big barn. He has like 4 tobacco drying barns. And they said, Pete, have you ever been in a tobacco drying barn? And I'm like, no, I haven't. So they open the doors, we walk in, and the smell, oh my gosh. I'm not a smoker. I don't chew, whatever. And he grows dark tobacco, which I guess is for chew, like Copenhagen, whatever. But the smell was just heavenly. And I was like, I could lay down and sleep in here. The sides of the barns, they're all tarred from what they do is they put hardwood on the floor and set it on fire. And then they douse it with sawdust so it smolders for 2 weeks at a time. And a guy like Dale has to go in 3 times a day and monitor this tobacco drying. And I was digging the smell, and Dale said, Pete, when you do this your whole life, you don't think of the smell that way. It gets on our clothes, it gets in our house. He was laughing when he said it, but Dale took such great care of his stuff. You can see that he had a 7410 two-wheel drive, 3,200 hours, brought $69,000. The previous high I'd ever seen on a two-wheel drive, 7410, was 62.5. So again, to people who say the used market is terrible right now, it's like, well, pieces of it but not all of it. Again, if you have this stuff, this nice 10-plus-year-old stuff, and you take care of it like you guys do up here, the values are holding up. At least right now, they're holding up. Right next to that 7410, you can see there were a pair of 4455s. And you maybe saw the YouTube video I posted. The next one was a two-wheel drive with 5,501 hours on it, sold for $74,000. It was the highest auction price ever on a two-wheel drive 4455 with over 5,000 hours. And next to that one was a 7,400-hour 4455 two-wheel. And that went for $72,450. The guy who was runner-up on the first one bought the second one. So it's interesting, when I was down there, and we posted this video preview the day before with Dale, and it proved a point, another machine repeat rule of mine, 35 years. When you buy a piece of used equipment, whether you think about it or not, you're buying Dale. You're buying the seller. Whether they treated it like a piece of crap, then you pay accordingly. Or if, like Dale, they spent their whole life just meticulously doing everything in their power to care for this, then you pay this. You pay the Dale premium. Now, if you think about that, think about all the auctions when you were younger that you would go to, back in-person auctions, local, wherever you're from. And if it was the right farmer that had a really good reputation, and I'm looping in, I drive from Rochester, Minnesota, I show up at this auction, and I always contended I could tell in about 40 seconds, once I got onto the farm ground, it was like, oh, this is gonna be a good sale. You just tell, everything neat as a pin, the shed looks great, and prices are high. Now, locally, you know those farmers, and you know, well, that's Bob. Bob's on the school board, he's on church council, Bob takes great care of his stuff. So the prices were high. You got the Bob premium. Now, if you, again, step back, as you make your farm plans going forward about your used equipment, whether you trade it or sell it outright, think about this. And again, we're uncomfortable upper Midwest to say how good our stuff is, but there's ways to do it. And what I tell people, if you're selling something privately, you can list it for sale on our website. It's like $50. But if you do that, drop me a note. It's just, there's an email right on the bottom of machinerepeat.com, or hit me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And what I really need, when you list your tractor for sale, I need like you standing by it, and you talk to me into the phone and go, hey, Pete, this is Bob from Clare City, Minnesota. I just listed my whatever, my Gleaner R72 for sale. And just nothing fancy. Just say, well, I've had it for 12 years. I bought it from Smith Implement. And just that. Text me that video. And when I put that with the listing, now the guy in Kentucky feels like he knows you. And yes, it's stupid, but we're humans. And the idea when you're selling something is to get people emotionally engaged with it. It'll sell for more money. And the other suggestion I have, if you trade equipment with your dealer, what you really should do is find a young person with a drone. And when you plant and when you harvest, you need to get drone footage on your farm. It's cool video, so there's, you can enjoy looking at it for years, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in 3 years when you want to trade in your 780, and there's a frickin' ton of them for sale, but there's only one that's yours, just one. And that's what you have. That's why auctions work, because there's just one of these for sale here today. You want it? Maybe you should bid again. You have to try and engage people. So you get these videos, they're very powerful. So that would be a suggestion. But Dale's sale, I asked him, I said, Dale, he had all John Deere tractors. And right at the top when I met him, he said, Pete, he goes, I like John Deere tractors and I like Chevy trucks. Life is very simple. And by the way, he had a Chevy C65, a 77 model with like 58,000 miles on it. And we looked in the cab and I guess, God, this looks like new, about $13,000. But Dale said his favorite tractor was this 2640. Legit hours, 2,111. And the reason he said it was his favorite was because he said he used to drive it with his dad back when he was a kid. And you can see the price there, $20,475. Second highest auction price ever on a 2640. Now, you know what the highest priced one ever was? Do you guys remember the movie Field of Dreams? It's like in my top 5 movies all time. When Kevin Costner was plowing up his corn in 1980 movie Field of Dreams, he was on a 2640. I always found that kind of weird that in Iowa you'd plow your corn under with a 2640, but it was Hollywood. But anyway, 5 years ago, a Hollywood auction company sold the tractor for $64,000, the same tractor. And by the way, if you love the movie, go onto YouTube and type Machinery Pete Field of Dreams. And years ago, I interviewed the farmer who owned this, and it was his farm. And his name was Donnie Lansing, and he sold it at auction for $64K. But a little factoid, next time you watch that movie, in the very end, after Kevin Costner has the game of catch with his dad, and they turn the lights on in the ball field, you know, and they will come, Ray. So when the cars start driving up at the end, that was Donnie in the first car. He was in his Buick. And he said, Greg, they made us wait all day. And then they said, okay, go. And they filmed all these cars driving up. But again, that was the only 2640 sold higher. A couple days later, I was down in Jasper, Missouri. Of course, livestock equipment's been much better the last year or so here. This J-Lore vertical mixer brought $33,500, second highest auction price I've ever seen on a J-Lore, $55.75. I'll maybe skip ahead here. I got a lot of graphs on by category. I think I'll skip through that. I would share just a couple things on the back end of our Machinery Pete website, which thank you for shopping at our site. We appreciate it tremendously. We keep, besides auction prices, we keep track of raw supply by category and by make and model. And we also keep track of search traffic. So is it up, is it down? And that's been fascinating. Like this little chart here, this is a 2-year look at supply and demand on high horse tractors. So the blue is the supply line. So if you go to the far left, that's 2 years ago. That's like January 23. Now that was right at the tail end of that period when there was no used inventory. So that blue line, I mean, there was nothing. It was dangerous for dealers to sell a piece of used off their lot because they could sell it for more 2 weeks later. And the orange line, that's you guys shopping for high horse tractors at machinerypete.com. So you can see that blue line the last 2 years has steadily risen. Whereas the orange line, you know, last year dipped quite a bit as things tightened up. It was about June 1st, we started to see a drop off. It's like, well, people are pulling back. Auction prices are softening on this big stuff. And, you know, auction prices tell the tale and supply and demand charts tell the tale. So I'll just zoom through here. I want to get to a little section. Oh, I should stop on that. Combines. This is my chart on combines. Well, here's my 1 to 10 scale. You can see used value started to fall more in 23. So again, I think 2024 was year 2 of combines adjusting. They're already lower, down at 6.7, 6.8. And if you get back to the high horse tractors, they're still up at 8.0 on my one. Dropping quickly, went from 8.7 Q2 to 8.0 Q3, down further Q4. But again, maybe where they're headed is where combines are right now. Oops, sorry. So combines are lower in the 6 range. And here's the supply and demand on combines. Obviously seasonal, so you could see last fall, end of year, the blue line going down, dealers smashing stuff out, you guys shopping for combines in the fall. Here's a little chart. I don't know if any of you guys bought these combines. These sold in Alexandria, December 23rd, couple Pickett Twin Masters, 18 models. I think they were off of the Midwest Machinery reduction sale. One brought 118, one brought 113. They had a 12 model that brought, I think, 86 or 86.5. So we track all this stuff. It's been really fun over the years. But again, I just want to get through here. Good use hay equipment's been up, the livestock sector. But this is what I call our Machinery Pete ratio. You maybe heard me talk about this. It's pretty simple. So I got 35 years of auction data, right? But in 1999, I hired a person and I said, you have one job. Type in every dealer advertised price you can find. I don't care what it is, just type it in. And then I had that behind the scenes because what I wanted I wanted to compare the average auction price to the average dealer advertised price and track this through the ups and downs over the decades. And this is what I call the machine repeat ratio. And what I found that normal times, 71 to 76%. Average auction price runs, so basically 3/4 of dealer advertised price on the lot. Now, when times are good, like 21 to early 23, my machine repeat ratio was like 85%. So auction prices were butting right up against dealer ad prices. Conversely, now we're moving into a different period. And again, if you look back to a decade ago, 13, 14, 15, I remember 24-row planters, my index was like 52%. It was, at auction, you could sell it at auction, it was like pulling teeth. It just didn't bring anything because there were a zillion of them on dealer lots. So here's a current look machine repeat ratio if we talk combines. And again, combines are a year ahead. So my machine repeat ratio on the far right kind of runs in that 60s. But it's interesting here, look at the two highest machine repeat ratios. I talked before about smaller equipment being hotter. Look at the John Deere S660, 75%. And look at the 9670 Deere, 97.8%. So auction prices were very strong last year. Conversely, the big monsters, you're down as low as like 59.2% on an S690. Now an S690, that's in that, the later model ones are that 16, 17, that's that 7-year mark that I talk about, that's where the value is. So you can see it right there. The auction prices on that stuff, they've dropped quite a bit. So if you're looking for a second machine, I think 2025 could be a pretty good year to buy a used combine. Now, if you do the same thing with late model high horse tractors, you can see the machine repeat ratio is more in the mid to high 70s, which is really interesting because I talked before about this huge increase in 0 to 3-year-old items sold at auction last year. If you'd have told me 12 months ago, Greg, there's going to be a 125% jump in this late model big stuff sold at auction, how do you think prices are going to hold up? I would have thought they would have fallen more last year. So I think they held in pretty good. I think 2025 is going to be year 2 of the high horse tractor adjustment. Again, so we'll have to track that. But, some other ways to look at data, like on a John Deere 9620RX, very common model, you can see 260% increase in the number of them sold at auction last year. And think about how old that model is. So again, it's right in that spot, that perfect depreciation spot I'm talking about. And you can see the average auction price fell 25.6%. A couple other ones, a Magnum 315 last year, the average auction price was down 35%. An 8285R, almost the same, down 33.5%. So again, one of my other machine repeat truths from 35 years, I call it my theory of opposites. So the time to be an aggressive buyer is when everyone else is backing off. And you flip it, when do you want to sell? Well, sell when nobody's selling. I think you can do that with financial markets, with land, with equipment. Think back, every land, think of your uncle, your grandpa, your grandma, whatever, bought that piece of land, 40 years ago, and it felt like a ton that they paid for it. And it's like, they questioned whether they should do it, and they did it. It's just kind of having your financial powder dry to take advantage of these dips in the market, I think. But again, 10-year-old stuff in good condition is holding very well. This was that sale in Dexter, Minnesota with the Brent 2596. You can see how the tractors did. That 9520T 171, highest price in 16 years. The 05 7920, of course, low hours with a loader, highest record by $23,000. At the same time, you get this pullback in other sectors or on newer equipment. So again, I'm sensing right now there's big pushback on the price of new. It's got so high. And if you read Farm Journal, you maybe read a column I wrote recently, and I was uncomfortable writing it, but then I was like, screw it. It just has to be said. So the price of new has got so high, for 35 years I stand at auction and I wonder, can it keep going up? Can it keep doubling? And I always thought of a pirate ship and a pirate ship has a plank, right? So you're inching out further down this plank. How far is too far? And do you ever go off the edge? I don't know, but it feels like we're at these increases the last 3-4 years have been so high that, it's what makes this all very interesting right now. I'll just finish with a couple other examples. We had a sale in Michigan, December 30th. It had that right stuff, 10-plus-year-old, and you can see this Miller Nitro, $270K. That was the highest auction price ever on a Miller Nitro by like $30,000. Same sale had this 9530. Again, it's pre-DAF, 11 model, 230, record high auction price in the U.S. on a 9530. Also had a 10 model, 8345R, went for $225.25, something like the second highest in like 12 years on a 10 model. Color doesn't matter. This Bueller out of Wisconsin last September, 103, 250. Of course, it's like new, but again, record by 73. The record was 73,000. So again, you're talking 30K over, just amazing. A Magnum 240, MX 240, record by 26K out of Nebraska last summer. John Deere 7930, 190K, Eaton, Ohio, second highest ever. But again, you guys get the idea. And I think as I chart this data, I look kind of backwards. And I think December of 22 is what we will all consider to be the absolute top of the market. And this was an auction we covered in Hamlin, Iowa. And that picture I took, the seller, I have a picture of him here. This guy, Dwayne Sandberg. And it was Dwayne's auction. He had every 20 series Deere. He had an 8120, 8220, 83, 84, 8520. So it's that age. It's what everybody wanted. It was low houred. And we walked down this line and it was like record. The 8220 sold for $182,000. And right when it sold, a guy tapped me on the shoulder. And it was I can't remember the farmer's name, but he bought a lower houred 8220 in 2019 on a sale in Williams, Iowa that we filmed for the TV show. And he paid $117 for it. And he just watched this higher hour one go for $182. So that's what I'm getting at. Aggressive when others are pulling back. And he just smiled. Because his 117 at 8220, I mean, he bought it at the right time at the right price. But I'll just wrap with this. Again, I talk about when you buy a piece of used equipment, like on that sale, you're actually buying Dwayne. We did this interview with Dwayne the afternoon before the auction. He was very emotional. Spent his lifetime farming, 60-some years, and his wife was ill. She passed like a year later. But I said, Dwayne, let's just talk. And I said, Dwayne, what advice would you have for young farmers? And what he said I thought was just perfect and simple. He said, work hard and don't quit. That's it. And again, to be able to talk to someone like Dwayne and thank him for his career, being there, doing what he did, has been so much fun all these years. As it's been just as much fun being up here today talking to you guys. I'll stick around a little bit. Happy to visit with you. And if you have any questions, again, hit me on social media or our website, machinerypete.com. Any questions before I move on?
Do the John Deere or the higher popular models of equipment tend to break more records than the less populars?
Good question. Based on model, I would say I sort of look at it like, well, I'll hit it this way. If you look at search traffic on our machinerypete.com, it's interesting. I looked at the 175 plus horsepower category. You talk popular models. You know what the most searched model is? 7810. And as I travel around the country, I just try to listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So the number of times people have told me, or a boxcar Magnum, if you're on the red side, an 8930 or 7120. Oh, we love that model, Pete, it's our favorite. And auction prices do so, I mean, they are higher. It's just a direct function of what people want. So as you get into the newer models and you guys are like, this one's on it or this one's off, absolutely the auction pricing does show that. And again, it's kind of that brutal honesty. And again, all the auction pricing is free at our site. So you can just hop in there and we try as update as best we can every day. It's hard to keep up with like the folks at Steffes Group, the number of sales they're having, but we just keep flowing it right in there, and it's been so much fun. But good question, and again, I'll stick around, and thank you very much for having me up today, folks.